Jesus in My Life, episode 63. Welcome to Jesus in My Life, a podcast with Rob and Jack, where we interview everyday people like me and you about their extraordinary experiences with our Savior, Jesus Christ. Welcome to another episode of Jesus in My Life. This is Jack, your host. Today, my co-host Rob is on vacation. Today's episode is going to be quite different than usual. One of the things that happens when we interview people for our show is we end up sometimes having a fantastic conversation after the show has been recorded, and we're still sitting in front of our mics, and it's just such a good conversation. I'll just hit record and we'll keep talking. And today's episode is going to feature a couple of those conversations from episode 54 with Will and episode 57 with Marcus. And so I'm titling this episode Stories from the Cutting Room Floor. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a clip from a conversation we had with Marcus after we were done recording, where he was sharing about God's faithfulness. When we choose to follow him, he takes care of our needs. And he shares a story about how at a certain time in his life when he had lost his good job and he was in between careers and his family didn't really have much. And he shares about how God met him in that situation. And it really reminds me of Matthew 6, in Jesus' words when he's talking about our everyday needs. And he says in verse 33 of Matthew 6, "But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." I really feel like that's the theme of what Marcus is about to communicate. One warning before I start the clip: you will hear a dog in the background running around. Hope you enjoy.
So I'm working at Lowe's for this year. And this is new in my life, right? And I was a guy that chased the dollar and the positions and the power and all that stuff. And I'd left the company had shut down that I'd worked for. And I was making really good money at that time. And now we're making less than half of that. I got 3 kids. I got a wife who's in college, going back to nursing school. Had no job during this time. And one, we had to find a place to live, right? So we left our house. And she finds this little house down the street over in Vintage Park area, down the street from the kids' school, Mary Sukamoto. And she keeps bugging me about it. And she's like, you need to go. It's a perfect house. I'm like, I don't have a job. They're not going to rent me a house. So I go down there and I meet this guy, Mr. Guzman. And I go there completely so I can tell her I talked to him. And so I meet him and I tell him the whole gig. And I tell him, I go, look, man, I don't have a job right now. But I got a severance package and all this stuff. But man, my family's my priority. I got to take care of them first. But I said, I promise you, I'm going to get a job. I'm going to get a job. I hadn't gotten a job at Lowe's yet. I'm going to get a job. And so I leave like content. Now I can tell her. I talked to him. And he calls me before I get home. And he goes, hey, I don't know why, but I want to rent you the house. I was like, what's wrong with you? You heard the part about I don't have a job, right? And he goes, I know, but I trust you. And man, that was wild because, again, I wasn't a trustworthy guy. And so during this same time, that's when I go to Lowe's and I get this job. And I go in there and they say, put your resume on and I'm like, no, I'm going to stay and talk to somebody. I'm talking to multiple managers. And then they offer me a job. And I look at the guy and I say, I got to go home and pray. And he's like, what? I said, I got to go home and pray with my wife. He goes, didn't you want a job? And I said, I do. I just got to make sure this is the right job. And, he's like shaking his head. Young kid named Marcus. He's like me, 10, 15 years ago. He's a young guy. He's got some success at Lowe's. He's like an ops manager or something. And so anyway, go back, say, yeah, I'll take the gig. Lowe's, like that world, man, it's crazy, right? Your retail hours, you're working all over the place and all that stuff. And then one thing I worked out with them in my department, like I could, Sunday mornings I was off. So anyway, I'm there for a short period of time and they offer me an opportunity to jump up to this management position. I've been there a very short period of time, but they're like, with your background and all this stuff, blah, blah. And it would have been much closer, right around the same salary point I was at before that we'd left. But I would have to work Sundays. I would have to work all this stuff, right? And I didn't have to pray about that because I knew, right? For me, right, I needed to be at the church. I needed to be there. And so I told him, I appreciate the offer, but I can't do it. And the guy says, he's like, no, I don't think you heard us, right? So Ken was the manager. He's like a bulldog. He's got this giant bald head, right? Big jaw, like he's like a human bulldog, man, right? And so he was mad. He was mad that I turned this position down. So at Lowe's, in retail land, but definitely Lowe's, there's like certain positions. There are few. There's one where you work Monday through Friday, like 7 to 4 set shift, and it's this freight flow manager spot in the back warehouse. They never come available. And when they do, man, people come from all over for this stuff. And so that came up. Our guy left, and so I put him for it. People from all over the states and other stuff are putting in for it, and like people in the store are putting in for all stuff. And so Ken calls me in his office, and he goes, store manager, and he goes, hey, I understand you put in for the freight flow job. I said, I did. And he goes, I just want you to know, he uses some colorful language. He says, you'll never get that job. You'll never get that job. You turned me down the other one, never giving you that job. I said, okay, and I went back out and I did my thing. Just went back to work. And so, weeks go by. People put in for it from out of state. Something went wrong with their background check, this and that, right? Multiple people. Happens over and over and over again. This job is open for months, like a couple of months. That never happens. And I'm up on this ladder in the cleaning department. I remember very clearly because I was stocking the shelves up at the top, and Ken walks up to me and he goes, hey, why do you do it? And I look down at him and I'm like, what are you talking about? Yeah, what do you mean? Like, this is where this goes. The Clorox goes right here, man. I'm positive. And he's like, no, why do you do it? He's like, I treated you like garbage, and yet you're here every day. You work hard every day. You're right. And all this stuff. And I said, if you really want me to tell you, I'll tell you. And he goes, I do. And I said, well, I don't work for you, man. Like, I work for the Lord, and everything I do is for that. You're a store manager. You made a choice. That was your choice to make. I'm honoring it. And he throws his hands up and he walks away, right? Mad. Yeah. He comes back a couple minutes later and he's like, I don't get it. I don't get it. And he's like, you're probably one of the best, the department manager, a little area, which is just a glorified, red vest guy. But, he's like, I don't get it. And he walks away again. He comes back one more time and he goes, you want that job? And I said, yeah, I'd love to have that job. And he goes, the next time we make a schedule, it's yours. And he walked off. So mad. He's so mad. So I'm doing that job. But, what ends up happening is I get to talk to Ken a lot more. And I'm talking to him about my faith, and I'm sharing with him. And, a few months down the road, towards the end of that year, I walk through the appliance center and I see him, and he's kind of got tears in his eyes. And I'm like, hey, man, what's going on? And so he tells me about his mom, and his mom's sick. And I got to pray with him. I got to share the gospel with him. I got to all this stuff, right? And I wish I could tell you there was a salvation moment with him, but I got to share everything with him. A couple days later, maybe a week later, I got a job opportunity from a back in the building industry and all this stuff. And I walk in his office, and I open the door. I walk in, and he's got his head down. He goes, "You're leaving, huh?" And I said, I am. And he was like, I knew you would. You wouldn't be here long. And I said, yeah, but I'm glad I was here. And he says, me too. He said, if you ever want to come back, you're always welcome. And that was it, man. And I moved on. But that year was so profound and so powerful, right?
It's that powerful, your witness of just serving unto the Lord.
Right.
It confounds the world. It don't make no sense.
Right.
This next clip features Will from episode 54. Will is a family man. Him and his wife have fostered many children. And very much like Marcus, he shares a story about a time in his life where financially things were very uncertain. And God challenges him at this period in time to trust in him in a very unique way. And so I want to share that clip with you. I hope you enjoy.
Another one, we stopped paying tithe when we were in Las Vegas. We were going to Cornerstone Church, so basically fell on some rough times. And there was a couple things that went out of the budget, Starbucks and like the easy ones right there. Like, I can do without Starbucks. So that one leaves the budget, and a couple other things, we're not going to go out to dinner as much, and tithe at the time. And my wife and I are both Christian. Our kids are going to Cornerstone Christian. And we had made this conscious decision somehow that we were not going to tithe at all. We were going to cut our tithe. And I mean, this was a time frame of probably, gosh, I almost remember the amount. So it was probably 4 to 6 months that we decided we were not going to tithe. And we were going to pray because we were trying to figure out, God, what do you want us to do? Why are we here?
Sure.
Do we need to go back to California, or do we stay in Las Vegas? You know, we got a great church, good church family. And so we're praying not tithing. Right? What an odd combination, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And I just kept getting this aching in my heart. And I'm like, what is that about? What, like, am I supposed to go there? And here I'm like facing this direction, you know?
Yeah.
And God's like, no, right here.
Yeah.
And so God ends up basically saying, do you trust me? And man, that was a tough one because we were broke. I mean, we're eating ramen noodle, trying to figure out how to, you know, feed kids and stuff. And I'm like in between jobs, and I'm like, do I trust you? Yeah, I trust you. That's why I'm praying, you know. And here I'm kind of having this back and forth with God. And my wife and I sit down to pray that night. And I'm like, babe, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think we're supposed to pay tithe. And she's like, do what? With what? Like, we don't have any money.
Here's 1/10 of my ramen.
Yeah. So it was actually, it was pretty wild. I said, okay, you know, I want you to pray about it. And we come together and we come to agreement that we're going to pay tithe. Even though we don't have the money, we're going to pay tithe. And so at the time our house was for sale, like so much was up in the air.
Yeah.
We paid tithe, and it was literally almost like God said, thank you for trusting me. And immediately everything fell into place. Wow. Our house sold. I got a job. I mean, it was immediate. And really, I think it was just, again, it was God's way of saying, do you trust me or not?
Yeah.
Because you either do or you don't. And it's pretty simple.
That's right.
Yep.
And so we paid our tithe not only for that month, but we had paid back.
Wow.
So, I mean, it was a chunk of money, right?
Okay, that makes it that much more radical.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And so the fact that God just went, okay, cool, yeah, you trust me, now I'm going to move. And he moved in such a big way that both my wife and I were just completely, I mean, we were flabbergasted. Both of us were like, well, why didn't we realize it was that simple? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're fighting it and we're running circles, chasing our tail, and all of a sudden God's like, do you trust me?
Yeah.
And we said, okay, yeah, we're going to trust you, God, and put ourselves out there, thousands and thousands of dollars. And God's like, okay, cool. Your house is sold. Here's your job. Here's where you're going next. It was like crazy. We're like, oh, okay, I guess we're going to California.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was pretty
I
wild.
love it. That reminds me of George Mueller. I don't know if you ever read about George Mueller. Like he's
I don't think so.
He's like, he had an orphanage in England, like when there was no other orphanages. Like he's just trendsetting for like caring for the poor, right? This guy was like, I have great needs to take care of all these kids in the orphanage, but God says he's going to take care of us. So I'm just going to trust him. I'm not going to tell anybody that we need something. And so there's this awesome story where he has like 20 kids at the table for breakfast and they got nothing to eat. And he's like, okay, well, God said he'll provide. So they start praying. He starts praying for the meal that God's going to provide. And literally, as soon as he's done praying, there's a knock on the door, and it's the because milk used to be delivered by cart, right? And he's like, hey, my cart broke, and I got all this milk that's going to go bad. Could you guys use it? So like they take all this milk, and then he closes the door. He's like, thank you, God. And then the door knocks again, and it's like the baker, right? The baker's like, hey, I just felt like I needed to come bring some bread over to you guys, you know? And it's like, and this guy's story, like story after story of God just being like delivering, you know, just come last minute, you know, just, you know, it's so hard for us to trust God sometimes, really. Like
It is. We want to grab the steering wheel.
Yeah.
Right.
We say we think we're great people of faith, but like, man, we really want to just take control. And God's like, no, you need to get in the back seat, son. I can drive the car.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times throughout, I mean, our foster care journey where, I mean, it would either be my wife talking to me or me talking to my wife and just saying, hey, are you carrying this yourself? Because we're not built to carry this ourselves, babe. Yeah. This burden, what we're doing is not something that you do on your own. Yeah. Like you cannot. Right. You'll burn out. You'll be done. You won't be helping any children. And we would, you know, talk each other through those moments where it's like, okay, God is the one that's doing this. God is going to provide respite for the baby so we can do this, or something along those lines. And my wife and I would come together and it's me and you and God doing this, and it was that understanding that really, I think, got us through a lot of just crazy times in foster care. I mean, the foster care stuff, I think, is a totally separate topic but it's all the same. Yeah. It's utterly broken. Yeah. And anybody who gets involved in the foster care and adoption process understands how broken it is. I mean, there's at any given time, there's 3,000 kids in the system that have nowhere to go. And when you understand the burden that's on the system, and then you're going to try to carry some of that burden, there's no way. It's not even physically possible for you to do that. Yeah. Not without God. Yeah. Right. So, I mean, that's one of the things I think that's been pretty amazing. I mean, a lot of our relationships that we've talked with people, whether they be short-lived or longer relationships, that really has been like, you can't do this without God. Yeah. And if you do, you're not going to be doing it long.
Or right.
Or right. Yeah.
I love that story from Will, because it's just so true that apart from Christ, there's so much that we just can't do. And we have a tendency as human beings to want to take control ourselves. But God often puts us in situations where we have to let go control to Him. He does this sometimes through our health, through job situations, and a lot of times through our financial situation. And I can't imagine how many people are maybe facing this kind of situation now in light of post-COVID United States with rampant inflation. It's hard to trust God with our money. And we allow that worry to paralyze us sometimes. But God causes us to trust Him, because what is impossible with men is possible with God. So with that in mind, I'm returning back to Marcus, our guest from episode 57. And in our post-interview conversation, he shared with us a time where finances were going to get in the way of ministry. But God challenges us to trust Him. And when we trust Him, He comes through. Enjoy this clip.
We didn't have any money. We didn't have any money. And my wife and I had made a commitment, right? We were not going to live in that house that we had a day longer. We could pay for it. We were blessed. It was able to short sell. We got this other spot. We committed to giving to the Lord first and what we could, right? The percentage isn't the key. It was the first commitment to God. It came out every week, but we were in the red every, paycheck to paycheck. And so we couldn't afford to go. And so I was not going to go to the camp that year. And my wife had said, we had gone the year before, but this year they asked me to speak. And so she says, no, I think you really need to go. You and Gage, that's our oldest son. And I was like, so we ended up going. What I told you happens, man, this really cool experience. God really feeds into me. I meet this guy, Craig, who ends up being pivotal in my life and my ministry. We come back, and literally there are 2 checks. One from each company I used to work for. One was from a retirement thing I didn't know about, and another was from a lawsuit I didn't know I was a part of, and it equaled almost to the penny the amount that we had to pay to go to that camp. And you're like,
only God.
Yeah, you're like, really?
Only God. Yeah.
Like, there's no other way that happens, right?
Exactly.
Man, so many amazing moments, right?
I love that story from Marcus, because it actually reminds me of a similar story. I have been involved in church work for a really long time, not professionally, but just as a volunteer. And I serve as an elder at the church I'm currently at. And at one point, you just kind of serve where needs are needed. And one of those was somebody to handle the administrative work at the church, which included paying the bills and managing our accounting system. We were going through a really hard time financially as a church, and we just kept bringing the finances before the Lord. And I want to tell you now that He got us through all of that, and the church is thriving. We're constantly asking God for guidance. And I just remember this one month where I had to pay all the bills and we had very little money left. And after paying every single bill, when I went to our accounting system to see what was left, we had $1. And you would think that the next month we wouldn't be able to make our bills, but from that moment on, God took care of us. And the truth is, if God is calling us to something, money is probably the least of our concerns. We serve a God who owns everything. I think of Nehemiah being charged to rebuild the walls at Jerusalem, and all the resources were provided for him. All he needed to do was follow God's instructions. When God has called us to something, he will be the provider. I really hope these stories have helped you trust God in every aspect of your life. This next clip is another demonstration of trusting God in a very different way. The truth is, a lot of the things that we've talked about were physical issues that we needed to trust God to get us through. Sometimes the things we need God's help with are spiritual. And this next story that Will shares deals with the demonic realm. The truth is, the Bible's very clear. There are demons, and they seek to influence people. And I think one of the ways that they get a door into people's lives is through drugs. And this story is from when Will was in Uganda on a missions trip, and he actually witnessed the demonic realm. Take a listen.
In Uganda, God gave me the ability to kind of see demons.
Wow.
See
Yeah.
I guess you'd say the realm
Yes.
of demons.
Yeah.
It was something at the time that was just absolutely terrifying to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's something I didn't fully understand, but I understood what we were up against there. And so really it was another time period of growth in my life where God was basically saying, you have this ability. And I knew I had a gut instinct. Mm-hmm. I've always had a very strong gut instinct, right? Mm-hmm. But when we went over to Uganda, we went into the slums of Kampala at the time, and we were bringing in kids off the streets, the street kids that were digging in trash, that were living in the sewers, and we brought them into this little building, and half of them were just completely high out of their minds. They were basically huffing gasoline, any chemical that they could find, and I'm like so confused. I'm like, why are these kids doing this? And one of the locals that was with us there, Patrick at the time, he had explained that they huff gas or whatever chemical they can find to kill the hunger because they're basically starving to death. And I remember just sitting there, and I'm sitting there in the church, and we have about 40 kids. And I say kids, I'm literally talking probably 4 years old to 12 years old. I mean, these are all young kids, and half of them are high in some form or fashion. And we've taken the cloths that they had to huff the gas, and we had taken them away, and we're trying to talk to them about Jesus, and we're trying to talk to them about, hey, we're going to get you some clothes. We're going to get you, a couple things, maybe something to eat. And these kids, about 10, 15 minutes into us having them in this building, start clawing their way to the front.
Clawing?
Literally clawing their way to the front. And it was one of the most terrifying experiences because there was a couple things that were going on, right? And I was part of the security team, essentially.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm there to help the needy. I'm there to help kids in need. And I began to see what was happening. And these kids that when I say clawing, they were trying to get to the rags, because when you huff chemicals, especially over a long period of time, you can't go that long without doing that, or your body just starts craving it. Yeah. And so they started having withdrawals is what was happening. And there was essentially, I had a half a room full of, 40 children, half of which, to me, I could see the demonic presence of not only the chemicals, but the area was a place of voodoo and all kinds of different things. Yeah. And so I'm sitting there and I'm just completely terrified.
And they're clawing and like almost rabid. They're clawing.
Yeah, I mean, they're basically coming across each other, climbing over each other. To get to either the stuff that we had to give them or the rags so that they could huff the gas. Yeah. And that was one of the moments in my life where I'm like, holy cow. And I start seeing what's actually happening. Yeah. And so I'm terrified, one. Two, have a whole different understanding of spiritual warfare
That's
and
right.
the realm of demons and spirits versus what we were trying to do, and understanding that, hey, there's going to be resistance there,
That's right.
but we're going to come against it, and we're going to come and still do what we intended on doing, God's work.
Yeah.
That's right.
And so that's one story that I would say is a pretty wild one. But
That's a pretty wild story for most of us Westerners. We haven't experienced seeing people manifest a demonic influence in their lives. But, I used to work in downtown San Francisco where there were a lot of people on drugs. And I will tell you, I've seen this firsthand. Some people are simply on drugs, but other people have allowed these drugs to literally open themselves to the demonic realm. And the truth is, it's naturally quite frightening. But the thing that really struck me in the last couple of years is as I read the Bible and you see the disciples interact with people who are demon possessed, whether that be in the Gospels or in the book of Acts, they're never afraid. The demons are afraid of Jesus. So if the Spirit of God is resting on us, if Jesus is truly our Lord and Savior, demons are not something we need to be afraid of. It's just another area where we need to learn to trust God. I hope you'd enjoyed this episode that features a lot of different stories from our cutting room floor. And we kind of hope to do some more of this in the future. If you like it, we'd love to hear your feedback. We can always be reached at jesusinmylifepodcast@gmail.com. As we wrap up this episode, I want to just share one short clip with you, returning back to Marcus. Marcus is a pastor, and his life was completely and utterly redeemed by God. He was on a path of destruction, and now God has given him a ministry of life to lead others in the way of Jesus. And in this last clip, Marcus is just reflecting on the goodness of God and where he's brought him from and to. I hope you enjoy. Tune in every Tuesday for more episodes. God bless.
Like I said, you get going and you just could keep talking, man. When you talk about the other side of it and what God's done since, and what He's doing in and through the church now, and what He's done with our family, and watching my boys and their life now that's so different, right? I look at my 22-year-old all the time, man. Like when I was his age, I was so mixed up. Like life was so. That's not even his world, right? That's not even his world. The kid is super faithful, super stable. Like he's one of the most committed men in our church. And that's because his mom's raised us all really well. But like,
I love how you say,
oh yeah, she's raising all of us really, really well. But yeah, man, it's just been. I get up there and I preach, man, and I'm still like, I have every card that they've ever given me that says pastor on it, because I'm like, how is that possible? How is that possible, man? They gave me a Bible when they ordained me. It says Pastor Marcus, right? I'll have to be dead for someone to pull that out of my hands, right? Like it's just, it's unreal that that's life for us now. And then I love being in my own hometown a little bit and having people come into church now and again that I went to school with or that kind of thing, right? And they walk in and they're like, that can't be right. How is that guy up there? And I'm like, that's, people ask you, I don't know if you guys ever get that stuff, but I get asked, like, what makes you, like, what's your credentials to be here? I'm like, Jesus. I went back to school. I got, at Liberty and Wilmington School of the Bible, biblical studies. I did all that, but that's not what qualifies me. It's like what we talked about with Paul earlier, right? Far be it from me to preach on anything, talk about anything except the cross of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, right? I mean, it's just what qualifies me, Jesus. That's it. Proof positive any idiot.
Qualifies the called.
Right. Well, yeah, he doesn't call the qualified, but he qualifies those that are called. Right? I love that quote, man. So yeah, I'm man, honestly thankful for you guys asking me to do this, because I love revisiting those moments because you're just in awe of God. Just in awe of God.
Thank you for listening to Jesus in My Life. New episodes release every Tuesday. Subscribe on your preferred podcasting platform so you don't miss a single episode. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please consider sharing this podcast with a friend or family member. If you would like to help our visibility online, consider rating us and posting a review on Apple Podcast. Have an awesome Jesus in My Life story? Contact us at jesusinmylifepodcast@gmail.com.